Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmer, and together with my co-host Mark Ornish of Statewide News Service, jbiztechvalley.com, and now the columnist for the Jewish Press.
Right, I have a column called Albany Beat, but what's more important today is our special guest, return guest, is Senator George Latimer from Rye, Westchester County, and he's a staunch Democrat, you might say. No wavering on that. But I also have to tell you that we have our 200th episode of the Jewish View today, and I'm so happy to have George as our guest.
You sponsored the Kiddush for
that's right. So that's what we basically have here. So I really want to say welcome to George. And
nice to be with you both.
And I want to show everyone the cake. And I also want to, in case hopefully it won't.
These Three Stooges will go on the floor.
And don't drop it there.
Hopefully it won't drop. But I also want to thank Joe Alandato, who's our director and has been from day one, and also Joe Kniff, who's the chairman of the PEG Oversight Advisory Board, which is the board the panel that makes the rules and regulations, I guess, for this studio. So anyway. Thanks to everyone
for doing a good job. 200 shows in what, about a year and a half?
A year and a half, yeah. So
beautiful.
Very impressive,
quite the task.
Very
so
impressive.
I'm going to hand out some cake here for everyone.
Now you're turning into a caterer. You're a news reporter now.
My first job was at a catering hall when I was 14.
I think every Jewish person starts that way, like in the Catskills or something.
Yeah.
Every kid does something like that. I worked in a hotel for a while, too.
So, George, you get the 200.
There you go.
That's very kind. Thank you very much. I hope that my cardiologist is not watching this program.
Right. And we won't send them the link either.
No,
okay?
absolutely. Thanks.
But, I'm on a diet too, Mark.
You're on a diet too. Well, here, we got a special cake for you.
A rabbinical cake.
And you know what?
There you go.
You got to have some forks too.
I gather we're going to be shown on the Food Network as well as
well, we got a special
local access.
A special hook to the Food Network, don't we?
I suppose we do. I suppose you do.
You're talking about the governor's main squeeze.
I'll talk about anything.
Leave that be.
Okay, now, so somewhere along here, we do
we
have
some forks here. Yeah.
Okay, well.
We have forks.
Okay.
That's an old Theodore Bacall joke.
Yeah.
You know, you want a soup, where's the soup? And it's just right in front of you. Drink the soup. Where's the soup?
Okay. Well,
so he says, well, it must be that no spoon.
That's right. So this
There's
is
always something
for you,
so.
And we need another fork, and I can't get that fork.
Well, I wouldn't worry about the fork or the cake. I'm sure I'll have it in due time.
Okay.
We can talk about whatever you want to talk about, though.
Now we have to talk to the real thing, the real
All right,
politics.
but I want to have a bite of this cake because it took a lot to get 200 shows in a year and a half. So,
gentlemen, cheers.
Oh, very good. Okay.
Very good. Got my taste of it.
Okay. There you go.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, Senator Latimer.
Get down to business now.
We're getting down to it. You are the ranking member on the Senate Education Committee. And we have a lot of issues coming down at the last minute during the end of session. One of the issues is what I used to call, but the governor renamed it, was the Education Investment Tax Credit.
Right.
What did the governor rename it again? It was like the People's
Parental Choice, something like that.
Parental
choice. There's always a good marketing way to describe these things. And since in my corporate career I had a career in sales and marketing, I appreciate the value of it. It's picking Don Draper over Perry Mason, in terms of a career choice. But so it's repackaged, but it is a different version of the Education Incentive Tax Credit Program that's been offered a couple of other times before. Senator Marty Golden, and Mike Cusick, the Assemblyman, have a bill into the two houses. The governor also put a version of it in the budget, which did not get adopted, but as an issue, it's still out there very much so.
And how do you stand on it?
Well, I support it. Now the provisions that the governor has put out changes from what the provisions were in the the main bill, and for this kind of an interview, I don't want to get too deeply in the weeds about all the different nuances of it. But basically, what it does, in principle, and why I support it in principle, is it allows individuals to take a tax credit when they make a contribution to a school that has either as its core a religious institution or it can be also a charter school, and it could also be to a public education education fund, as created by most of these different school districts. I certainly, in my district in Westchester, have most of the school districts have an education fund. We're in a day of very tight finances in all different types of schools. And I've been an advocate for strong public education spending, and as we may get into it, I'm certainly unhappy with the state not supporting the public school system sufficiently. But in addition to that, if I can just say, Rabbi, in addition to that, I see the need for a robust public education and a robust private education. I do not think it's an either-or situation. And the people who choose one or the other, I think, are selling short the mix that's out there. And I have experience in my life with a sister who went to the parochial school system in the town I grew up in, and I'm a public school student from an urban environment in Westchester County, the city of Mount Vernon, and I see the value of both systems being robust and strong.
Just saying, the budget did have an increase over $1 billion for public schools.
Yes, it was inadequate in my judgment. The Board of Regents called for a $2 billion increase, and that was much closer to what you need. And the reason why I say that is that in our urban environments, Albany is one of them, but not as impacted as, say, Buffalo is, as Yonkers and some of the other school districts, we have a significant need for pre-K across the board. The children who come out of certain socioeconomic backgrounds are not prepared on day one of kindergarten to perform and to function well. And New York City has pre-K. That was negotiated, in the budget a year ago. And so I think money needs to be set aside for that. But as I said, I don't put one thing at the counterpoint of the other. I think we need to invest in education across the board. So that's why I do favor the education incentive tax credit at the same time that I support a robust public education.
Now, the chairman of the education department was John Flanagan, who is now the Senate Majority Leader.
Right.
And did he had to give up his chairmanship?
Yes.
So who's the new chairman?
Senator Carl Marcellino, also of Long Island, has been named by the Republican conference, the majority side of the aisle, to head the Education Committee. Wow. Of course, I'm the ranking Democrat. And we haven't met yet. But, I know Senator Marcellino. I've served with him in the 3 years that I've been in the Senate. And previously, I was in the Assembly for 8 years, and we had some dealings on different issues across the board. He represents a district on the North Shore of Long Island, next door to the one that John Flanagan represented. Right. And I represent a coastal district in Westchester, right across the Sound. So we have a lot of things in common on issues of the environment and transportation and so forth. So we'll try to find common ground on education issues as much as we can. My basic demeanor, I know you call me a staunch Democrat. I'm a Democrat, and I'm proud to be a Democrat, but you work across the aisle. You try to find ways where Republicans and Democrats can agree on things rather than turn government into the demolition derby of partisanship.
Well, you know what? I admire you for that because, you were chairman of the Westchester County Democratic Committee, so that's why I used the word staunch Democrat, right. And plus you were head of the Westchester County legislature. Right. So, you have all these top political plum positions that you were in. I don't say condolences, I say congratulations, yeah. Right?
There were plum positions that didn't carry a lot of compensation with them, though.
Right, exactly.
The chairmanship of the party was zero compensation.
But they were very,
they were important leadership positions, and I'm glad that I had them in that era.
And I know a lot of people, when they become chairman of a party, that they say, well, the only good opposite party label is a dead opposite party label, yeah. Yeah. So I look at it as you being very reasonable in the fact that you got, the D running through your veins, but you still have the compassion where you can still get past that and still look at the on the Republican side of the aisle.
I would just tell you, I think that in Albany, which is a political city because it's the state capital, you tend to see things in terms of politics and partisanship. I spent 20 years in corporate America, worked for subsidiaries of Nestle and ITT. And in those places, you might hold your personal beliefs, your ideological beliefs, but you park them at the door. The job is to accomplish the mission. What's the mission? Grow revenue, produce profit, introduce a product that's appropriately marketed so that the consumers buy it, et cetera, et cetera. And you don't let ideology get in the way of it. You don't sit there with somebody else you're supposed to work with and find ways to disagree, or I'm going to blame him if this doesn't work. And that's the problem with partisanship. It's not that you sacrifice what you believe, but you recognize that whatever you believe, you still have to find a way to accomplish a task at the end of the day. And that task is more important than whether I get the credit or you get the blame or the reverse. It's very hard to argue that in the capital city.
One of the things is the divide. I mean, you're talking about Democrats and Republicans, is upstate, downstate. And you hear that a lot. New York City is booming. What is, first of all, is the economy in Westchester? Is it more a suburb of New York where you're doing well, or it's like more upstate where it's hard times?
Well, Westchester's doing well in comparison to most of the rest of the state. We are the suburb just north of New York City. And if you go back to the 1960s and 70s, many of the major corporations in New York City decided to move their corporate headquarters out to Westchester County. So we have in my Senate district the headquarters of IBM, the headquarters of PepsiCo, the headquarters of MasterCard, and they're all within about a 5-mile range of each other. So those are tremendous economic drivers that are in Westchester County. You have in White Plains a city of about 55, 60,000 people, and if you go there, it is north of New York City, to be sure, but other than Saratoga Springs, I don't think you'd find another community that's got the nightlife and the energy of a White Plains. And it's really because of the proximity of New York City. If Westchester County was positioned where Dutchess County was, we wouldn't have the economy we do. So it is an outgrowth of New York. But as Goldilocks walked into the Three Bears, cottage, she saw porridge that was too hot, porridge that was too cold, and porridge that was in the middle. And many times that's how we as suburbanites view ourselves. We have certain links with New York City. We have mass transit issues as New York City does. We have issues of high cost of taxes and issues that link us to New York City. But we also have issues that link us to the rest of upstate. Our structure of government is like Albany County structure of government. We have a county government. We have cities and towns and villages. We're not New York City, this one monolithic local government that has control over all the services. So in other types of issues, tax issues, we link much more closely with upstate communities. Now, upstate in the Hudson Valley, when you start getting to the western part of the state, you see the divide is not just upstate, downstate, but in the corridor between New York and Montreal, you have some vibrant cities. I mentioned Saratoga Springs, Lake George Village, Lake Placid. Glens Falls is having a renaissance. There are elements of Kingston and Poughkeepsie and that are starting to show stronger effort. Hudson is a little community that's starting to get stronger. Peekskill.
Albany has nanotech also.
Right, and Albany has got a very strong economy given both the state capital and the business and the educational institutions around Albany. When you go west of that north-south strip, you have problems in Elmira, in Binghamton, to some degree Syracuse, certainly in Rochester. I was involved in some early 1980s development, hotel development in Rochester, and in those days, Rochester had a booming Kodak, a strong Xerox, it had an IBM presence, Bausch & Lomb, French's Mustard, and it was a white-collar city compared to, say, Buffalo, which was a blue-collar city, a steel and coal Great Lakes community. Now Rochester has fallen on very difficult times. So to answer the question, we're doing well in the suburbs outside of New York City in comparison to the rest of the state. Nothing is ever as good as you want it to be. We have our pockets of problems in certain municipal areas, and we have our urban problems in parts of Westchester County, parts of Yonkers, Mount Vernon, Peekskill, and so forth.
And northern Westchester, do they still have farms in northern Westchester?
Well,
is there an agricultural community?
It's rural based on an urban concept of rural.
But
to come up, further north, you would see it really as a suburban area with lots of land, horse farms and things that Pound Ridge and Bedford and North Salem are very affluent areas. So they're rural in the sense that you drive down a country road and you see greenery, but the value is very high for the land there, and
so you're not
as many working farms, and you don't have that type of rural poverty concerns that you have when you get to other parts of the state. So we're very fortunate. But on the other hand, we're not exactly New York City. Upstaters view us as downstate. We never use that word when we describe ourselves.
Suburban.
And when we are in Manhattan, they think that we're upstate and we're right next door to Schenectady. So it's all a question of perspective.
Well, I know that when I grew up in Brooklyn. When I went up to college at UAlbany, I went back and visited my friends, and they said, "Now wait a minute, Albany, that's near Buffalo, or is that near Montreal?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, Buffalo and Montreal, first of all, are not too close together. And Albany is the same distance to New York City as it is to Montreal.
Well, you've seen that iconic, you've seen that iconic New Yorker poster, in which you're seeing 7th Avenue, 8th Avenue, 9th Avenue, 10th Avenue, the Hudson River, Jersey, Chicago, Vegas, and LA. As if it's just right beyond the other side of the Hudson. And that's reflective. And let's be candid. When you're in Manhattan, not even the rest of the city, the outer boroughs, because in the Bronx you call Manhattan the city.
That's
We're going into the city, we're going into Manhattan. When you're in Manhattan, you have a world-class city for which, in my judgment, there's no equal. There are wonderful communities, London and Paris and Hong Kong and so forth. But There's no equal to New York City. It is a place unto itself. And it's very difficult when you're in that heady environment. It's the headquarters of finance. It's the headquarters of the news media. It's the headquarters of fashion. It's the headquarters of advertising. All of these
Broadway,
major, Broadway theater, entertainment. It's very hard to say, well, the decision makers in New York are also going to be sitting in Albany, 150, 200 miles to the north, and they're going to be representatives from smaller communities around the state, and they will sit in judgment on rent stabilization, and they will sit in judgment on a host of other issues. So from a New York City perspective, it can be difficult to look at the rest of the state, unlike New York City, and say, why do you have any control over us? We are New York City. We're this world-class community. But that's the way it's been structured, and we work through it. That's all you can really do.
So now, we had recently, it was announced that MaryEllen Elia was announced as the new education commissioner.
Right.
Do you know about her?
No, I don't. I mean, I've read the announcement came a day or two ago.
Are you going to ask her to come before the committee?
Well, we expect her to come before the committee. Now, we're close to the end of the legislative session.
So?
And that may or may not, there may or may not be time to do that.
She doesn't officially take office until July 6th,
right? So
which is after session.
Yeah, so my expectations, and this is the prerogative of the chair, Senator Marcellino, but I would certainly support if he calls a special meeting of the Education Committee to meet with her and talk to her about her ideas. I think she's probably going to want to get settled into Washington Avenue down the street.
Well, she had
and start the process.
She had no idea what EITC was.
Right.
She thought is that a voucher system? Yeah. And I went, no, it's not.
No, it's not a voucher
and then
system.
Someone else chimed in. Mark? Yes, yeah, yeah. And they had a staff person whispers and say, no, it's when you give a contribution, you want a tax credit for the contribution. And,
so there's going to be a lot of learning
curve. But a big learning curve. And,
well, from everything I've read.
I think our state education budget is larger than the entire state of Florida's budget.
Well, it might be. I mean, Florida's a big state now as well.
It is,
but I'll take your, I'll take your counsel on the numbers. Yeah. But the bottom line is this: she was most recently superintendent of the Hillsborough County Public Schools, which is Tampa area. Coming in to take over the state system, you're coming in not only in a large jurisdiction, but you're coming in at a time of controversy and a time of change. And some of the things that the governor's advancing, some of the things that other academics are saying are the changes that are needed in the system are very debatable. One man's reform is another man's wreckage, depending on whether you agree with the direction or not. I've been a critic of high-stakes testing. I think that the model which started in
Common Core just
Common Core
just was high stakes.
Yeah, Common Core is sort of the cap that they put on all the changes that have happened in education. What Common Core specifically is a change in the standards for acceptable graduation at the high school level. But what Common Core also is a series of steps that get you from, say, 3rd grade to 12th grade with that level of higher rigor. Built into that is high-stakes testing, in which the act of taking tests in English language and mathematics carries much greater weight in the child's advancement, and then also now connected to the teachers in the teacher's evaluation and the administrator's evaluation. But this came in pieces. President Bush was the advocate for No Child Left Behind. By the way, great marketing slogan, who wants to leave a child behind?
That's right.
No Child Left Behind, in essence, was the high-stakes testing component of this. President Obama and Arnie Duncan, his Secretary of Education, added to it here's another acronym, APPR, the professional review process that we are debating now as to how it should be constructed, in which the high-stakes testing results for the kids counts for the teachers as well, as some percentage of their evaluation. That connection, which came with the Obama administration, also came with money. And you may remember, Mark, because you were covering the legislature in 2010, we had a very bad budget year. It was the budget year that followed the Great Recession of 2008-2009. State was bereft of revenue, and there was the federal government holding out $750 million in aid if you adopted these standards, and we had a budget that didn't close until August, if you recall. And one of the pivotal ways it closed was with this additional money. But you made a commitment to do certain things with that money. And while it wasn't clear at the time we accepted the money, it became clear thereafter that it involved embracing this change in the way education is delivered. And so now you have to step back and look and say, are we happy with what we're doing? Is this the right path? And each of these issues, we started out talking about the EITC, high stakes testing, the annual performance review, issues relating to tenure, issues relating to termination of teachers for some valid or cause, in theory a valid cause. And each of these different bullets, there's about another 5 bullets, all of these things are part of the mix that's swirling right now in our education system. And education is the second biggest piece of our state budget.
That's right.
We have a $142 billion budget. Over $50 billion of it is health care, primarily Medicaid. Over $30 billion of it is aid to education. And if you're in some districts, either rural and certainly the urban districts, the problems that they have in part is money and in part other things. And so they look to the state for solutions.
And the new commissioner didn't do very well in her last year or so. I mean, she was saying, justifying her existence at Hillsborough, saying, well, most superintendents last maybe 4 years. And she lasted 10. And it was the last year that they didn't get along, and she got bounced out by a 4-3 vote, so it wasn't overwhelming, but she did get bounced out.
Well, and what you have, just to add,
personality because of the high stakes testing, and it was how she didn't express herself the right way, and the board that voted her out wasn't the board that voted her in.
Well, that's part of it. You have in many cases elected school boards, and when you have an election campaign, from time to time, members come in as part of a team of people to defeat the people who were in already, and they come in with a desire to change things. And in theory, with an election, they have some voter support for that change until they go before the electorate again and confirm whether the electorate liked the change that they delivered. And so as much as I've read, but I haven't had a chance to talk with the new commissioner about it, that's part of the narrative that she brings into the door. What happened? Why did it happen? How did it happen? I don't presume, Mark, anything until we have a chance to talk, until we have a chance to do more homework. She was announced a couple of days ago, and now people are scurrying through clippings online to determine who she is. I'd rather, and I'm sure, Rabbi, you do this all the time, I'd rather meet the person and talk to them and draw a judgment over time, not a snap judgment.
But do you like the process that it wasn't transparent, that maybe it didn't have to be transparent, but would you have liked it to have been more open and less secretive?
Well, I mean, of course, and here's the reason why. Here's the reason why. We had in the prior commissioner, John King, Dr. King, a person who was very controversial. He came out of the charter school experience. He did not have a lot of classroom experience. He was not superintendent of a school district either in New York or elsewhere. And then you immediately are at the top of a pyramid. At the top of that pyramid, you are executing major change in the way education is delivered. But you need to have the understanding and ultimately the buy-in of all the stakeholders in the system if you're going to create change. If you came in as a baseball manager, let's say you want to turn around the New York Mets. They're getting a little better, but they're still pretty lousy. I'm a Met fan. You want to come in and change the Mets. You come in and you assess the players and you make some moves, some personnel moves. There are a couple of players who are the players who are already there and they're performing well, and you want them on your side for the changes you're going to move. So Matt Harvey, the pitcher, and David Wright, the third baseman, you're going to want to develop some relationships with before those changes come in. And I don't think that Dr. King exerted the right balance in making those changes. And the proof of the pudding is as you travel the state, they had raucous public sessions where parents were very upset over this. You have soccer moms have come to me and said, my children come home, they're crying, Mommy, I don't want to go to school, it's no fun anymore. And what I worry about, it's not if it's fun or not, but here's a valid question that I ask myself. When I was in school, teachers took us on an outing to the botanical gardens in the Bronx, which was a wonderful experience. I loved it, and you're talking about biology and plant life, and now you go see it in person, it opens your mind. You know, we created a program in the Westchester County Legislature, which we brought young people in so they could sit in the seats of the legislature and run a sample legislative session with age-appropriate issues, things that they could talk about at 5th grade or 9th grade level. Those types of things are not part of the testing module that you're going to be judged on, and teachers are not going to do those kinds of things if they have so many days to cover a certain curriculum and for the kids to be drilled and then to respond on a test. And that's what I worry about, because not every kid learns adequately well through the lecture and test format. Some kids learn by doing, by touching and feeling and seeing. And so my concern in all of this mishigas of, I know a couple of Yiddish words, revolved around education. Are we trying to change things because we have a vision and an ideology, an academic philosophy, or are we in a real world change where we analyze reality, we see needs and problems, and we adjust what we're trying to change to the problems and the needs that we have? My business experience taught me not to walk into Project B with everything we did in Project A and apply the same standards. Understand the unique dynamics of Project B and customize, using your life experience, customize the strategy for Project B that may not exactly be what you did in Project A. So those are the concerns I have, but basically I'm an optimistic person. I haven't met the new commissioner. I wish her the best. I hope she comes in with her experience in life work, and at the same time that she looks and she listens, maybe she learns a little bit, maybe I learn a little bit, and out of that we have a good experience.
Well, I'm hoping her experience in the last year of her tenure at Hillsborough was a teachable moment for her, no pun intended. Well, you know, and that she can move on and learn from that and not make the same mistake. I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask you about the about her.
Can I just, before, because on your note, I totally agree with you hands-on. For example, when history, I mean, we're in Albany, you learn about the Revolutionary War. Go out there to Fort Ticonderoga. But you have to read a book, for, you know, if you're right here. And just that hands-on makes it alive, and we try to do that. Judaism also, it's a living thing. But just, I know we're very few minutes, and Mark also has the questions, but just almost like the practical issue, the dropout rate in high schools, now I don't know what it is in Westchester, but we had the superintendent of Albany schools at 50%. I heard it's Rochester, like you say, has troubles, and troubles in school, 10%. I think there should be more, like you say, hands-on vocational there also. I would teaching everybody physics and chemistry. Obviously, it's turning them off. They're not continuing with school. You
know, academics are not the path for everybody. There is a perfectly workable career to have, working with your hands, car mechanics, carpentry, plumbing, masonry. My father was a maintenance man who had some skill in those areas. My mother was a factory worker. The fact that I grew up and became a white-collar person, I'm the first in my family, followed by my sister. But that was not you know, the agreed-upon path until you determined that was the way you wanted to go.
One other thing I wanted to ask you about was, you know, you look at Dr. Steiner and you look at Dr. King, and now you look at you know, MaryEllen Elia, and hoping she's Dr. Elia.
Well, we'll call her doctor until we find out otherwise.
But you look at, you know, before Dr. Steiner, they were all white men and WASP. Now you had a Jew, you had a female, you had a black, you know. So I'm waiting. We had Carlos Carbolata, who was there briefly. So I'm just wondering if all of a sudden now in the past generation, past 10, 15 years, if maybe there's more of an idea that you need to be more diverse in terms of who the commissioner is. Well, you know, and it just seems ironic that you know, you had 150 years of white male and WASP, and now you have this, and you look at the Hall of Chancellors.
Well, Mark, let me comment before my time is done, and certainly you can cover these things on your next program. You've had an African-American president, an African-American governor in the last few years, which was inconceivable 30 or 40 years ago, much less 100 years ago. So the pool is opening. The prescription of not having a person do this or to do that is changing. Eliot Spitzer was our second Jewish governor after Herbert Lehman. And of course, we've had somewhat greater diversity in a lot of different positions. But I think we're trying to get, in my judgment, to what Martin Luther King Jr. wanted us to get to, which is judging people on the content of their character rather than on the color of their skin or their dynamic, ethnic dynamic. If you walk in the door, your ethnicity shouldn't be held against you. It's something to celebrate. I am not Jewish, but I celebrate, and I have many friends who are Jewish, and we enjoy each other's company, and you bring something to the table coming out of that life experience, so you're not eliminated anymore from consideration. On the other hand, I don't think trying to fill a box and check it off is the answer. You want the right person. And that right person might be female, it might be African American, it might be Latino, it might be anybody. And that's what we should be striving for, to find the best person.
I didn't know how to ask that question at the news conference without having half the reporters throw their pens at me and daggers at me, so I just left it alone. But I figured while we're here, I might be able to ask your sage advice.
Look, it's a legitimate question. My responsibility is to swing at the pitch you throw me. You know,
they're
not
so
to,
sensitive about this stuff.
Well, and people are. Look, I mean, I am quote unquote a white male. I am straight. I am Christian in a society that is majority Christian, and you would say, oh, I'm part of every majority group you could think of. But that doesn't mean I automatically think just like every other white male, you know, right-handed, senior, I forgot to say senior, over 60, every one of those guys. I think the way I think. And I treat you, and Rabbi, meeting you today, I treat you as the individual you are, not just as a representative of your demographic.
Right.
And I think that's the America we want. And we, you know, we're a little closer today than we used to be. We're not there yet, but we're trying every day to treat people based on who they are and how they act, not on the package that they come in.
That's a great way to leave this.
Yeah, it was an excellent end note, because I totally agree with that. And I think that is the American way. And Senator, you're doing an incredible job.
Thank you,
and we continue with success and with everything you want, and do it with good health.
And
Thank you. Let's celebrate with cake.
All right. I appreciate
Well,
our
maybe
friendship.
make a
Thank
l'chaim
you.
over
All
here.
right. Thank you very much. And I'm glad you were our guest for the 200th episode.
My pleasure.